Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Top Producer Show. Can't talk this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at. But anywho, my name is Brandy, and this is Jeff. And the whole point of doing this show is to show you guys what it actually takes to become a top producer in network marketing. Now, since this is geared towards network marketing, all the methods that we actually use in our traditional businesses as well. We use it in our holistic health practice, and we've used it in our real estate company. And we've also coached a lot of other business owners using a lot of the same methods. So you're welcome to stick around, take notes, and see how I can help you. But right now we are going to be going over a new book, which is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And I've actually never heard his story before, and I didn't actually know who he was until Jeff said we needed to read this book. So for the intro, do you know who you really are and what you're capable of? He said no matter who you are, who your parents are, where you live, or what you do for a living, or how much money you have, you're probably only living at 40% of your true capacity. And many people live by this victim mentality of why they can't achieve the things that they want to go do. And a lot of this comes down to a lot of your upbringing of like, he's like, you kind of have like two different sides. He's like, you either had no encouragement, or you had a very supportive household and you just were never put into a situation where you had enough pressure on you to change. So he's like, it doesn't matter if you have had a bad upbringing or a good upbringing, because he's like, either way, there's going to be some way to hold some people back. And then what it comes to is just that desire for a drastic change. So chapter 1, I should have been a statistic. And like I said, I've never heard of this person before until Jeff said we needed to read this book. So it went into just his story of like how he grew up. He grew up in a very abusive household, talked about like the dad running a business and how it was with his mom and his brother, and that they had to run eventually just to be able to get out of that situation, and then just how that affected him as a young boy and how he started to view everything around him. So some people are dealt a bad hand, and some people their limiting factor is that they grew up so supported and comfortable themselves, or they grew up in a bad situation, which we've talked about. So what are the current factors limiting your growth and success? What is holding you back? And are you standing in your own way? Because there's some things where we like to hold on to things. If you have grown up in a situation where, I was just going to move that a bit. If you did grow up in a situation where your upbringing wasn't good, you'll have this self-doubt and this self-talk where you think that you're not good enough. Therefore, you might physically be able to do the work, but there's something mental that's holding you back from actually moving forward. So he mentioned getting a journal and writing out your story of how you've been hurt and shape that pain. And he's like, you want to address the pain so that way you can flip it. And he's like, you will use your story, this list of excuses, and this is these are very good reasons why you shouldn't amount to anything, but then flip it to fuel it for your success. So it's just addressing what the issue is, because the other thing with addressing where you're getting hung up at, you can then catch yourself into bad habits of why you're not moving forward. Because we've seen this happen with a lot of people where they're just like, I know what to go do, but I just can't do it. Or they won't do it, and they're just like, I don't know what's hanging me up. And sometimes, and it's not like this for everybody, but every once in a while, we've sat down with people, and through a list of questions, we can figure out what the underlying issue actually is of why they're not moving forward. Sometimes it's an issue with a parent. Sometimes it's an issue with the spouse, of just like what they heard growing up that was holding them back. But anywho, That is what I got from this chapter. And for how this applies with network marketing, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
So I got similar things. You know, he says, who do you really are and what are you capable of? And the reason being is he was asked to go to a very prestigious college, and there was an MIT director saying that there's a hard ceiling on what you're capable of. And once you hit that hard ceiling, you're not going above that. And I guess the look on his face gave him away. And they asked him a direct question. He's like, look, if I'm asked a direct question, I will respond. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but his background is he's a Navy SEAL. He actually went through BUDS course, which is the Navy SEAL training course, 3 times in 1 year, which nobody's ever done. Not only did he do that, he passed that and went through Ranger School, and I can't remember the other one. It has something to do with some Air Force training. But he has 3 of the most elite training programs. He's been through all 3 of them and graduated from all 3 of them, and he's the only military person in history that's done that. So this guy is used to, if you're asked a direct question, you give a direct answer. And he basically called the MIT teacher out, and he's like, yeah, you're basically right. Most people do have a hard ceiling. He goes, but it's not 100%. It's not in every case. And he went on to kind of say, Heraclitus, I'm probably butchering the name, but during the 5th century, Persian, this was a Persian philosopher that said, look, out of every 100 men that go into battle, 10 of them shouldn't be there at all, which is kind of true. You know, 10 people end up winding up going somewhere. And I related back to John C. Maxwell talking about put your dream to the test. That is your dream, your dream. A lot of people end up following the crowd, and they have no business being there at all. He said about 80% of the people are literally just targets. You know, unfortunately, they're just in the way. He goes, about 9 of the people are the actual true soldiers, the actual true fighters. And he's like, thank God for the 80%. That allows the 10 or the 9 of the 100 to go out and do what they do, right? They're the ones who win the war. And he goes, but there's one that is actually just a warrior, you know, good or bad, they're coming out of the fight ahead. And he said, that's me. He goes, that was me. You know, I had the bad background. I had the things happen to me. He goes, but I took what was possible and pushed through. And in this book, he's going to go through kind of the different things and where he was at. We all make habitual self-limiting choices. We make our choices based on what we feel we can accomplish, and what you feel you can accomplish is tied to your self-esteem, and your self-esteem is a liar. Your self-esteem is a liar, telling you you can't, telling you you're not worthy, telling you, you know, that there's a limit to what's possible. And he said, only you can master your mind. Only you can master your mind. And then he goes into kind of a story. He said, I should have been a statistic, you know, based on where he grew up, based on the environment he grew up in. You know, there was alcoholism, there was prostitution, there was physical abuse, there was mental abuse, there was verbal abuse, there was emotional abuse, to the point where they wore certain clothes to disguise the wounds that were being inflicted daily. Like, and if you've ever been around somebody that's been in an abusive relationship or an abusive household, you start developing I found you start developing one of 2 things. You start developing something that keeps people away, or you start developing a very like over the top positive, kind of funny, personality to kind of distract people from what's really going on. And that's all it is. You're masking what's really going on. In his case, he grew up, this was the late 70s, early 80s. I didn't realize, like, when I looked at the date, we're kind of born around like almost the exact same year. So, you know, that time frame, you know, I get and I understand the early 80s. He was in New York at the time, upstate. And they, you know, it was surrounded by music and surrounded by all these different things that his dad owned. And they lived in this super nice neighborhood. So from the outside looking in, it looked perfect. Big house, nice cars, lots of money, everything looked really cool, but the reality is the inside of the house was hell, as he put it, hell on earth. And he goes, we basically lived with the devil. You lived with somebody who was abusive, you lived with somebody who was an alcoholic, you lived with somebody who was running illegal, operations, and then took it out on the family every single evening, to the point where he was beating, him, his brother, his mom unconscious, and then dragging them into rooms, and kind of leaving them there. So, this led to, him and his brother becoming, first of all, not only fearful, and anxiety, but eventually, as the story goes, as his mom kind of had enough, had a friend, it's always good to have a friend, had a friend that says, plan your escape, planned the escape, left with the two brothers. The older brother ended up going back, just because that's what he knew and that's what he was used to. Feeling the disconnect, feeling the abandonment, feeling that, what's wild is if you've ever been around people who have been through abuse, it's a wild how they justify it, because that's what's normal. That's what's normal. They don't know anything else. Which is a problem, because then you end up seeking out and finding people who are also abusive, who also have these problems. So the story goes is he ends up at a school in Brazil, Indiana, of all places. That's where his mom's family was from. So they land there. Grandparents take him in. He starts second grade. And the cool thing is he said, what's really wild is he goes, I never trust a smile and I never trust a scowl. And what he means by that is his dad, who was super abusive, always had a smile on his face. He goes, you can't trust people who are always smiling. He goes, at the same time, he went to a Catholic school when he got to Brazil, Indiana, and he goes, to the Catholic school, there was this one teacher, and the teacher had a scowl on her face. He goes, but that lady cared. You could tell. She said, hey, look, whatever the problem is, everybody learns differently. We're going to figure this out. And I think that's a lot like direct sales and network marketing, is everybody has to figure out their way. Nothing's perfect. There is no perfect path. There is no one way. Everybody says, well, this is the one way to do it. Okay. There's better ways, but however you figure it out that works for you, that's what works. And that's kind of who she was. The unfortunate part is he went from that scenario to the very next year, and this has a lot to do with teachers and mentorship. The next year, the teacher was like, get this kid the hell out of here because he's a problem. Get him out of here because he doesn't fall in line. Get him out of here. Now, I know now today, teachers discipline kids, and teachers kind of pick on kids and try to push them out. And I only know this because I know so many teachers. They try to push the kids out of the school, out of the program, because teachers are now graded on what the kids test on. Let me repeat that. If the kid tests bad, it's a reflection of the teacher. So therefore the teacher's raises and stuff have to do with the kids passing these standardized bullshit setup tests. Right? So there are teachers out there that try to pick on kids and get them removed from the classroom completely, so that way the statistic looks good for their class. I'm not saying in every case, I'm saying it happens. It really does happen. And that's kind of what he ran into. So that created, because he was getting in third grade, it was so painful. He developed, and he took a standardized test, and he goes, so now not only am I the only minority in Brazil, Indiana, in this school, but now I'm also the stupidest person out of all these kids. And it wasn't a big class, but he was he had the worst score, and, had a problem reading, had a problem, was barely able to read, barely able to write by second grade, because he was more concerned about not getting beat at night, and not dealing with his dad. And him and his brother would ride their bikes as far away as possible and try to stay away as long as possible, so that way they didn't have to deal with the situation. So, another thing you get out of this is hurt people. Not making an excuse, not saying that it's right. I'm just saying, where did this person, and I know the rest of the story because I've actually heard his story. He met back up with his dad years later, and he'll talk about that later in the book. But messed up stuff happened there too. Typically abuse is kind of, it's taught, unfortunately, and then handed down to the next generation, Typically, if there's, the same thing is true with drug abuse and alcoholism. along with, all these other things, you kind of, it just cycles down, generation to generation. Not because it's genetic. The only thing genetic about it is we're genetic beings doing the same activity. People are like, oh, well, it runs in my family. Well, no, nobody runs in your family. That's why it runs in your family. So that was a joke. I'm not saying anything bad about disease, because disease actually is a thing and does exist in the mind. So he had these issues. He had these problems developing. He developed a stutter. He started developing weight. He started developing hair loss. Like, the anxiety was so bad that nervousness takes over the chemistry of your body and starts changing your body physically. You'll tend to see people who have low self-esteem, people who have high anxiety, will start developing all these other problems. It's actually more dangerous than actually being around poisonous stuff, because the internal poison will kill you faster than anything. And doctors say this: 3/4 of all disease is based in stress. It's based in stress, right? So that's a self-esteem issue. And that's really kind of what we're talking about here. Eventually you want to take your bad situation, like what he's done, is in network marketing and direct sales, you can take all your bad stuff that's happened to you, and you do have to deal with it. Whatever the deepest, darkest, craziest shit that's happened to you, you have to go down and deal with that, because if you don't, you're going to go out here somewhere else, and you'll get to a certain point, and then what will happen is this, whatever this is, this deep, dark, unfortunate, bad scenario will come and grab your ass and pull you right back to that point. And it'll trigger by a reaction from somebody, by something that happens, by somebody saying something, by somebody doing something. So thinking that you can just move on and not deal with it. Now, the dealing with it part usually takes a professional psychologist, etc., etc. I've read a lot of Tony Robbins' book. Tony Robbins kind of specializes in this, about what happens to people. And I mean, he's dealt with rape, molestation. He's dealt with, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse. And he teaches something really interesting, because he grew up in an alcoholic, very abusive family as well. And he's like, you have a choice to look at a situation. He goes, typically what's holding you back, is you had a situation happen to you, and then what you did is you chose a meaning for it that is limiting. And what he means by that is if you chose, let's say there is some kind of abuse, and I don't know what it would be, but let's say it's some kind of abuse, and what you're doing is, based on what Tony Robbins shows and based on what psychology proves, is what you do is you take this bad thing that's happened to you and you give it a meaning. Unfortunately, that meaning is limiting you from doing everything else. So it's kind of like a self-worth thing. You're no longer allowed. You're no longer worthy of success. You're no longer worthy of being around good people. You're no longer, there's all kinds of different things. But the meaning you gave it is absolutely 100% a lie, and it's false. Now, the reason it's a lie and it's false is because, are there other people that have been through this that have succeeded? And the answer is hell yes. Yes, of course. The problem is you don't know any of those people, and you don't know the meaning they gave the same circumstances that you went through. Now, it's never exact, right? Because no two people are exactly the same. It's never exact. Sometimes it's a dad, sometimes it's a mom. Sometimes it's a stepdad, sometimes it's a real dad. Sometimes it's an aunt, uncle that, did bad, horrible shit. Sometimes it's there's a gamut of, variety and variance here. But the problem is you gave the meaning the same meaning. And there are people out there who have succeeded to a great level, even though they went through the most horrible stuff in the world. So therefore, what you have to do to get past it, to get to the other side, is give it a different meaning. Now, that's not in this book. I'm kind of giving you what I learned from Tony Robbins, and also in direct sales. Brandy said people will start building, and they get to a certain point and they feel that they can't do a presentation, they feel that they can't do something else. That is all tied back to self-esteem. That is all tied back to some thing that happened in the past that told them, hey, you're not worthy. You're not worthy, or you don't have the ability. Certain people just have the ability and you don't have the ability, which is horseshit, because if we got to the point where we can have a conversation with you, I'm going to know right off the bat whether you have the ability to do this or not. And most of the time, we're not going to bring you or put you involved in what we're doing if we feel that you have no ability to succeed. Now, I've watched people get past stuttering. I've watched people get past, alcoholism, drug use. I've watched people get past, multiple felonies. And they turn their life around, and they're able to kind of put their life back together and deal with that situation and then succeed in business. So your situation is not unique. You are not alone. But is it stopping you right now? Yes, until you deal with it. And I think, the very beginning of this book is just all the different stuff that somebody can go through, and then come out on the other side and succeed. And that's really what we're going to dig into. And I'm super excited about the rest of this book, because the rest of this book is, okay, now he's gone through some bad stuff, but the really crazy stuff is about to happen. So just because I know the story.
Yeah. And then I get to find out.
Yep.
So, anywho, so this is what the book that we are going over Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. So in case anybody is just jumping on and wondering which book we're on. But we are here Monday through Friday at noon. So if you guys would like to rewatch this video, all these videos will be uploaded to YouTube. So that way, if you guys want to go back and rewatch this, you are more than welcome to. But with that, that is what we have for you guys today, and we will see you tomorrow.